it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials as well as give a lot of baking business tips. And I am well aware that it has been a while since my last long form video. Today is just a good old-fashioned day in the life of a baker. This is going to be a very honest and really not fancy baking vlog, so I hope you guys enjoy it. This was taken during the winter holidays when things were chaotic and I was trying to get a lot of things done at once, and I believe it was actually taken over a span of a couple days. So first I was separating out my egg whites because I knew I was going to make macarons, and whenever I have a long baking day, I know that that's the first step that I want to do just so those egg whites can come to room temperature. Here's a little baking tip. If you know you're going to be doing a lot of baking and you don't have time for these little steps like browning the butter, which brings your sweets to the next level, by the way, then definitely brown it in advance and you can always keep it in the fridge. I had some brown butter in the fridge for a couple of weeks and it was totally fine to use. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. Cooking for people or baking for people that have some sort of food restriction is really, really hard, especially because I just never had to do it before. So holiday baking this past year was not as fun as it normally is. The way that I approach baking now for a big crowd is a little bit different because now there are a lot of people in the family that can't eat gluten. So for the most part, I make gluten-free options, and then there's a few things here and there that I'll make that are glutinous. Or gluten, as my son says. You can kind of see their hands there in the background. They were helping me out with the first few cookies, and you'll see eventually they lose steam. Anyway, when I'm usually baking for a crowd, I stick to what I know, and then I'll do variations based on what I already know is going to taste delicious. But in this instance, because I was really jumping into the gluten-free world, I was trying out all of these different types of cookie recipes, and I was really nervous that they weren't going to work out. In my experience with gluten-free baking so far, I've discovered that some things just turn out really, really dry, and although the flavor is great, the mouthfeel is just off. I find gluten-free cakes can get really, really close to just the regular cakes that I've been used to baking, but cookies are a little bit trickier, especially something like a classic chocolate chip cookie. I still haven't found one that has that right chew to it. The flavor was there, but it did just taste a little bit sandy and a little bit gritty, although it did have a slight chew. So keeping that in mind, I decided to go with cookies that are supposed to kind of have that type of textural profile. So I went with these snowballs, which are supposed to be melt in your mouth. I believe that I was supposed to add pecans to it, but instead I added cashews because that's what I had on hand, and these turned out absolutely delicious. Now, one little tip, if you are making cookies like this, you have to really make sure that you're not over baking it at all. I overbaked a few of them, and then it made it really, really difficult to roll them in this icing sugar. Also, I wasn't sure if it was supposed to look this pasty when it came out of the oven, but I assume so because the oven temperature was so low, and we want these to look white. So in the end, it tasted really, really good, and I also made that cookie first so that I didn't have to clean out my bowls. I am always doing everything to avoid double cleaning things, and because that was such a simplistic recipe and I'm really not caring if anybody is allergic to nuts, sorry family, but I just didn't. I decided to go right ahead and start on the next cookie, and these were going to be an espresso shortbread. Now this time around, I didn't use any fancy flour blend of any sort. I figured a shortbread cookie in its simplicity wouldn't be as susceptible to having any weird textural problems, and in the end, I was correct. However, I will say these did not bake up properly at all. You guys, if you're avid watchers of my channel, you probably saw the short where I had to fix that issue. I don't really know what happened, but flavor-wise and texture-wise, it was great, but the look of them was not all that pretty. I feel like I'm kind of going in an ombre order. I started with the white cookie, then it was a little bit of a tanned color, and now we're going straight into the dark chocolate color. These cookies made me the most nervous out of all of the cookies because honestly, this looked like a batter to me. I was not confident that I was going to get an actual cookie out of this because there was also no meringue portion. It wasn't like I whipped the meringue. It seemed very, very loose. So I only baked one cookie at first, but ta-da, it turned into one of the most delightful cookies with a really great texture because it was primarily melted chocolate. Throughout all this baking chaos, I also organized all of our snacks and did some grocery shopping. And then I came back and then I was ready to make these ginger molasses cookies that were gluten-free. And I love ginger molasses cookies. So I was so hoping that these were going to work out. After grating the ginger, though, I realized that I needed to get the dough ready for those shortbread cookies, so I decided to roll those out to give it time to chill because, with baking, everything is about chilling and rest time. So you can see here, I'm making these beautiful rectangles and they cut out so beautifully, but it turns out so wrong. But in video world, we can just make that problem go away for a little bit and revisit it later because, to be honest, all of those cookies have been consumed now. So any mistake, it's all good. And moving along, I started making the ginger molasses cookies, and I did a little mixture of the gluten-free flour that I had as well as the blend that I made earlier. I didn't want to use the full blend because I didn't have all of the ingredients for the full blend that I had made previously, so I just kind of topped it up with the gluten-free flour that I already had, and it ended up working out perfectly. Also, you might be thinking, man, those are some big chunks of ginger, and they are, but I really loved the textural experience that it added to the cookie. Obviously, if you don't like that, definitely just go with the ground ginger and ground ginger alone. You're going to get a really powerful ginger flavor. This particular cookie honestly tasted just as good as any other ginger molasses cookie that I have made. Anybody that has eaten gluten their whole life could not tell that this was a gluten-free cookie. And those that were gluten-free were so grateful to be able to have a cookie that just tasted like the regular cookies that they remember. Most of my family have been diagnosed with an intolerance or they're actually celiac much later on in life. So this really is very new for them. And in the past couple of years, they've had to make a lot of changes. Remember those egg whites that we separated for those macarons? Well, egg whites means that there's going to be lots of egg yolks. And my family on one particular side absolutely loves my creme brulee. So we're going to do a lot of creme brulee today. Very recently, I ended up buying a whole bunch more ramekins because I never had enough to actually feed my entire family. I also didn't really realize how much they loved creme brulee. So I decided to go big this Christmas and make as many as I possibly could. I don't use a stovetop method for my creme brulee. I just find it takes way more time. And yes, you do get a little bit of a different textural experience with that, but this is the lazy, easy way to do it. And to get rid of any chunks and to avoid any egg curdling, I always like to run it through a sieve. The key to getting an even bake with these is just to keep that temperature a little bit lower at 325 degrees Fahrenheit and make sure that it's in a water bath that is sufficient. If you don't do the water bath, it's just gonna explode and it won't be very good. While those were in the oven, I rolled all of my ginger molasses cookies and the creme brulees came out of the oven. And while that was happening, I decorated all of these cookies for my staff. I have a completely separate video of me doing that. I was very tired. And then I also made some cupcakes. Didn't show the baking process because you guys have seen me do that lots of times. And then I made some Italian meringue buttercream and I frosted these. And if your next question is, when did you find the time to sleep in December? The answer is never. I felt like I was baking non-stop and I wasn't putting out any content because I was baking non-stop. I couldn't tell you, how did I make all these really super fancy treat boxes last year and keep up with all of the baking that I normally do for my kids for their school? Because I just don't know, but this year I just felt so exhausted. We got off school really late too this year. It was pretty much all the way up until the 22nd. So I really felt like everything was just crammed all into a few days. All right, enough of me lamenting about the time that I lost during the holidays this year. Let's talk about the toppings on these cupcakes. These were not gluten-free and they were topped with that Italian meringue buttercream like I had mentioned, as well as a little bit of my chocolate chip cookies that I made that I did not show in this video, but I did make them earlier and I crumbled some of them on top. And my whole premise for this was kind of like Santa's cookies and milk. And then I ended up garnishing it with a little piece of peppermint candy cane. Do you know that I have been duped by so many fruity candy canes? I am not into the fruity candy cane life. I need it to be peppermint. Anyway, then I moved on to the gluten-free chocolate cupcakes, which is why they don't look as perfect as my chocolate cupcakes normally do. But you know what? You put a little bit of frosting on there and it's all good. And I ended up using American buttercream actually for this frosting. After that first round of creme brulees were done, I decided to make another batch because I did not want to run out, and this time I added some espresso powder. Now, truthfully, the espresso creme brulees are actually my favorite. I just love how that espresso note hits, and it really tones down any level of sweetness. And after a really gigantic meal, like the type you have at Thanksgiving and Christmas, I feel like a little bit of a bitter note is a good thing. Again, a little baking tip when it comes to making creme brulees: you do want to let this set in the fridge for as long as possible. So if you make it the day before, it's actually going to turn out a lot better, so there won't be a panic. If you don't have that option, obviously you should probably make it as early as possible in your baking day. Finally now, those egg whites have come to room temperature, and it is time to make the macarons. I know it seemed like we did so many things in between that time, but it is now time to make those macarons. I'm doing all the classic macaron things, really making sure to sift that. My macaron teacher said, if you don't sift it, you're going to end up with lumpy macarons. Now, a lot of recipes call for you to sift ingredients. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I skip it like 90% of the time. But in this instance, I never skip it because I do want my macarons to be nice and flat and beautiful. And I decided to go with this kind of swirly look. I don't know how worth it this color combination was. If I could go back in time, I'd probably choose something different. But honestly, these were devoured within minutes anyway, so it really didn't matter what they looked like. Also, I was saying in a short how I tend not to turn the batter as many times as I used to before. However, I will say that this batter here probably could have done with a few more turns just so that it would flatten out just a bit more. By the time I get to the end of my batch, it flattens out pretty nicely, but that's the finicky thing about macarons. And yes, I always use a Silpat when I'm baking my macarons. And yes, if you see a topping on my macarons, it's either a stylistic choice, but more than likely it's because I don't like the way that the top looks. So I'm just trying to mask that and trying to cover it up with pretty things like sprinkles or sparkles. At this point, I was rushing a little bit, so I'm sorry for the chaotic filming of these creme brulees. You can see the color difference between the classic ones and the espresso ones. These needed to set for a little bit, so I obviously decided to make another recipe because why not? We have so few on the go anyway. So I decided to make some classic Christmas crack. Now, I did make a gluten-free version and a non-gluten-free version. Honestly, the gluten-free version tasted better, and I don't know why. I think though it's because I ended up not having enough caramel sauce to cover on the non-gluten-free batch. I don't know how that happened because I doubled the recipe, but clearly my skills of spreading were not as even and as equal as one would have hoped. But this is one of those simple recipes that I just really don't make that often. I really only attempt it around Christmas time. Eventually, I made it work. I got the macarons all baked, and I believe that I do end up filling them the next day because that was a lot of baking for a couple of days. And here is how everything turned out. There's the espresso shortbread, the ginger molasses cookies, and I was very tired in this shot. See, look how sleepy I am. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. And right now, I'm uploading when I want to upload, so be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when I upload next. Bye!